Dawn breaks over the Al-Mansour family compound in Dubai's exclusive Emirates Hills, painting the Persian Gulf in shades of rose gold that seem to celebrate the city's impossible wealth. But inside the sprawling estate where fountains imported from Versailles dance to computer-programmed choreography, something has shattered the carefully maintained illusion of perfection. At 6:47 a.m., the head groundskeeper discovers two bodies in the palace's private garden, hidden beneath the sprawling canopy of a rare Arabian jasmine tree that cost more than most families earn in a lifetime. The woman lies face up, her simple cotton dress soaked with morning dew and something darker. The man's body is positioned beside her, his designer kandjura torn at the shoulder, revealing the kind of physical perfection that comes from personal trainers and nutritionists who cost 6 figures annually. Their hands are intertwined, fingers locked in a grip that death itself couldn't break. Blood pools beneath them both, mixing with the imported soil that sustains gardens designed to bloom impossibly in the desert. On the woman's neck, finger-shaped bruises form a necklace of violence. The man's skull shows evidence of blunt force trauma, his perfect face marred by the savage reality of murder. Within minutes, Dubai Police's elite investigation unit floods the compound. Within hours, the story that emerges will expose the darkest secrets of one of the Emirates' most powerful families. But here's what the international headlines won't tell you. This wasn't a crime of passion between forbidden lovers. This was the inevitable explosion of a family curse that had been festering for 3 generations, where honor and obsession collided with devastating force. Have you ever wondered what happens when love becomes rebellion against power so absolute that it feels like God himself ordained it? When the simple act of human connection transforms into treason against an empire built on control? Stay with us, because this story will destroy everything you think you know about forbidden love, family loyalty, and the terrible price of defying men who believe their wealth makes them untouchable. If you're new to our channel, hit that subscribe button now, because we're about to take you deep inside a world where billion-dollar fortunes can't buy happiness, where ancient traditions clash with modern desires, and where 2 people dared to love in a place where love was the most dangerous crime of all. The Al-Mansour family doesn't just have money. They have the kind of generational wealth that shapes cities, influences governments, and creates realities that ordinary people can barely comprehend. Their empire, built on oil contracts signed before UAE independence, had grown into a diversified conglomerate worth an estimated $8.3 billion by 2018. Real estate developments that transformed empty desert into glittering towers. Construction companies that built half of Dubai's iconic skyline. Investment portfolios that touched every major industry across 3 continents. But wealth on this scale comes with unique burdens. The family patriarch, Sheikh Khalid Al-Mansour, ruled his household with the same iron discipline he applied to business negotiations. At 73, his word was law, his approval was currency more valuable than gold, and his disappointment was a death sentence to anyone foolish enough to earn it. His children weren't raised. They were engineered to carry forward a legacy that predated modern UAE by generations. His eldest son, Rashid, was the crown prince of this empire. 42 years old, educated at Harvard Business School, married to the daughter of another prominent family, father to 4 children who attended the most exclusive private schools in the Emirates. Rashid embodied everything the family valued: discipline, strategic thinking, absolute loyalty to blood and tradition. His life was a carefully choreographed performance of success, from the tailored Italian suits that cost more than luxury cars to the calculated precision with which he managed his image at business conferences and charity galas. But it was the younger son, Faisal, who would ultimately destroy everything. Born 5 years after Rashid, Faisal Al-Mansour grew up in his brother's shadow. Where Rashid excelled in business strategy, Faisal showed aptitude for art and literature. Where Rashid embraced their father's stern expectations, Faisal quietly questioned the philosophy that reduced human beings to assets on balance sheets. Where Rashid married strategically, Faisal remained stubbornly single, rejecting every arranged match his family proposed. At 37, Faisal occupied a strange liminal space in the family hierarchy. Too important to dismiss entirely, yet too unconventional to trust with real power. His official role was Vice President of Cultural Development, a position created specifically to give him something to do while keeping him away from actual decision-making. He managed the family's art collection, oversaw their charitable foundation's educational programs, and attended events where his presence was required, but his opinion was not. His rebellion was subtle but consistent. He wore traditional kanjuras to family gatherings, but paired them with vintage watches that whispered quiet individuality. He attended mosque prayers, but afterward discussed philosophy with scholars who questioned rigid interpretations of faith. He lived in the family compound as expected, but transformed his private wing into something that felt more like a sanctuary than a prison, filled with books banned in conservative circles, music his father considered corrupting, and ideas that threatened the very foundations of everything the Al-Mansours represented. Faisal's greatest sin in his family's eyes was his empathy. He spoke to household staff as human beings rather than servants. He remembered their names, asked about their families, acknowledged their existence in ways that made his father furious. "You treat them like equals," Sheikh Khalid had said during one particularly heated argument. "They are not equals, they are employees. The distinction matters." But to Faisal, the distinction felt like the problem itself. Isabella Santos arrived in Dubai on September 12, 2017, carrying a single worn suitcase and dreams as fragile as rice paper. At 28, she was already a veteran of survival. Born in Mindanao's poorest province, raised by a grandmother after her parents died in a ferry accident when she was 7, educated through scholarships and weekend jobs that left her exhausted but determined. She had worked as a teacher in Manila for 3 years, earning barely enough to support herself and send money to her grandmother and younger cousins who depended on her. The recruitment agency had made Dubai sound like paradise. Professional families seeking educated nannies, competitive salaries that dwarfed what teachers earned in Manila, opportunities to save money and build futures that poverty had made impossible back home. The contract promised $1,200 monthly, accommodation and food included, 2 days off per month. Compared to her Manila salary of $300 monthly, it seemed like winning the lottery. Reality arrived with brutal swiftness. The agency that had promised reputable placements took her passport upon arrival, claiming it was standard procedure for visa processing. The accommodation was a windowless room in the compound staff quarters, barely large enough for a single bed and small dresser. The competitive salary came with deductions she hadn't been told about: recruitment fees, visa processing, uniform costs, even charges for the mattress in her room. Her actual monthly take-home, after all deductions, was $640, still more than Manila, but a fraction of what she'd been promised. Worse was the schedule. Her contract specified 50 hours weekly. The reality was 70 to 80 hours, caring for Rashid's 4 children ranging from 3 to 12 years old. She woke at 5:30 a.m. to prepare the children for school, spent the day managing their activities and education, continued through dinner and bedtime routines, and often wasn't free until 10:00 p.m. Her promised days off were regularly canceled due to family obligations that took priority over her exhaustion. But Isabella had learned long ago that survival meant adaptation. She loved the children genuinely, finding joy in their laughter and pride in their accomplishments. She studied Arabic during her rare free moments, improved her English by watching BBC News on the kitchen television after the family slept. She sent $500 home each month, keeping barely enough for basic necessities, telling her grandmother that Dubai was wonderful and she was happy. The lie was easier than admitting she was trapped in a beautiful prison, her passport held hostage by employers who could deport her on a whim, her survival dependent on pleasing people who viewed her as slightly more valuable than the furniture. What Isabella didn't know was that her arrival had already caught the attention of the one family member who saw her as something other than domestic help. Faisal had noticed her the first week, watching from his library window as she played with the children in the garden. He'd seen her patience when Rashid's eldest son threw tantrums, her creativity in turning mundane activities into adventures, her quiet dignity even when exhaustion made her movements slow. But more than that, he'd seen her humanity in a place where humanity was often the first casualty of wealth and power. Their first real conversation happened 3 months after her arrival, in the family library where Isabella had been sent to find a specific children's book for bedtime. Faisal was there, surrounded by texts on Sufi poetry, when she entered quietly, apologizing for the interruption in her careful Arabic. "You speak Arabic?" he asked in English, surprised. Most Filipino staff relied entirely on English or limited vocabulary learned through repetition. I'm learning, she replied, her accent careful. The children teach me. They find it funny when I make mistakes. What followed was a conversation that lasted perhaps 15 minutes but changed everything. They talked about the book she was seeking, which led to discussing children's literature, which opened into a broader conversation about education and the value of learning. Faisal was struck by her intelligence, the thoughtfulness of her observations about how children learn best through play rather than rigid instruction. For Isabella, it was the first time in 3 months someone in the family had spoken to her as though her thoughts mattered, not issuing commands or corrections, but actually listening and responding as though she were a person worthy of intellectual engagement. The conversation ended when they heard footsteps approaching. Faisal handed her the book she'd come for. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange. Neither acknowledged the moment, but both felt something shift in the carefully maintained distance between their worlds. If you're following this story and wondering how such a simple moment could lead to tragedy, stay with us. Because in families where power is absolute and control is everything, the smallest rebellion carries the weight of revolution. And sometimes, revolution begins with nothing more dangerous than two people seeing each other as human beings. Hit that subscribe button if you want to understand how forbidden love isn't just about romance, but about power, control, and the violent lengths some families will go to maintain both. The second conversation happened by accident. Isabella was reading in the garden during her brief afternoon break, her one luxury being a worn copy of Noli Me Tangere she'd brought from Manila. Faisal, taking his usual walk through the grounds to escape his father's suffocating expectations, noticed her beneath the jasmine tree. "Rizzle," he said, recognizing the book, "you read the Spanish original." She looked up, startled to be addressed. "English translation," she admitted. "My Spanish isn't good enough yet." "Yet," he repeated, smiling at her assumption that language barriers were temporary obstacles rather than permanent limitations. "You plan to learn Spanish." "I plan to learn everything," she said with quiet conviction that made him pause. "When you grow up with nothing, you learn that knowledge is the only thing that can't be taken from you." That conversation lasted longer. They discussed Rizzle's critique of colonialism, drew parallels to modern power structures, debated whether revolution required violence or could be achieved through education and enlightenment. Faisal found himself challenged by her perspectives, shaped by lived experience of poverty and exploitation he'd only read about in books. Isabella discovered a mind that valued ideas over status, that questioned rather than accepted, that recognized the humanity in people his family treated as invisible. These conversations became routine, not daily but regular enough that both began engineering opportunities. Faisal would time his garden walks to her break schedule. Isabella would find reasons to visit the library when she knew he'd be there. They maintained careful boundaries, never meeting behind closed doors, always in spaces where their interactions could be explained as coincidental if questioned. The conversations deepened. They shared books, exchanging perspectives on everything from poetry to politics. Faisal introduced her to Rumi and Hafiz, Islamic mystics who wrote of divine love in terms that transcended rigid orthodoxy. Isabella shared Filipino folk tales and José Rizal's letters, revealing a culture Faisal had never considered despite employing dozens of Filipino staff over the years. But it was their shared isolation that truly bonded them. Faisal, trapped by family expectations that reduced him to a decorative asset. Isabella, trapped by economic desperation that reduced her to temporary labor. Both were prisoners in the same golden cage, just confined to different wings. The emotional connection transformed imperceptibly into something more dangerous. The way Faisal's voice softened when he spoke to her. The way Isabella's face lit up when she spotted him in the garden. The loaded silences that stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recognition that what was developing between them violated every rule governing their worlds. The line crossed. The first kiss happened 4 months after her arrival, in the library during one of her late-night visits to return children's books after everyone slept. Faisal was there, as she'd known he would be, reading by lamplight. They talked in whispers so as not to wake the household. The conversation turned personal. "Why did you never marry?" Isabella asked, the question bolder than she would have dared months earlier. Faisal looked at her for a long moment. "Because I was waiting," he said quietly, "to feel what I feel when I'm with you." The kiss was gentle, tentative, loaded with the weight of crossing a boundary they both knew was irreversible. When they pulled apart, both were trembling, understanding that this single moment had transformed them from two people stealing conversations into conspirators in a love that their world defined as criminal. "This is impossible," Isabella whispered, but she didn't move away. "I know," Faisal replied, "but is that enough reason not to feel what we feel?" The affair that developed was conducted with elaborate precaution. They never met in Faisal's quarters, too easily monitored by family. Never in her room, subject to random inspection by Rashid's wife, who occasionally checked on household staff. Instead, they met in the garden after midnight, in shadowed corners of the library when the compound slept, in brief moments stolen from the surveillance that defined their lives. Their physical relationship was secondary to the emotional connection. Yes, they were intimate, finding in each other's arms a refuge from the loneliness that had defined their lives. But more than that, they were seen. Isabella wasn't just labor to be managed. Faisal wasn't just a disappointment failing to meet family expectations. Together, they were fully human in ways their circumstances typically prevented. They talked about escaping. Faisal had access to money, could secure passports and visas. They could go to Europe, start over where his family's reach didn't extend. But reality always intruded. Isabella couldn't abandon her family in the Philippines who depended on her remittances. Faisal couldn't bring himself to destroy his mother, who had no power in the family hierarchy but loved him completely. So they existed in stolen moments, building an impossible love in the shadows of a palace that represented everything designed to keep them apart. If you're wondering how people risk everything for love they know is doomed, you're asking the right question. Sometimes the heart rebels against circumstances the mind knows can't be changed. And sometimes, rebellion is the only way to assert your humanity in systems designed to erase it. Don't forget to like this video, and share it if you believe these hidden stories expose truths about power and inequality that need to be told. What Faisal and Isabella didn't know was that the compound's head of security, Ahmed Hassan, had noticed inconsistencies in the nightly security footage. Brief gaps in coverage, camera angles mysteriously adjusted, Faisal's car leaving the compound at unusual hours. Most damning, thermal imaging showing two heat signatures in the garden long after the household slept, positioned in ways that suggested more than casual conversation. Ahmad was loyal to Sheikh Khalid, absolutely. His family had served the Al-Mansours for 3 generations. His salary supported not just his immediate family, but extended relatives across the Emirates and Egypt. When he discovered evidence suggesting Faisal's involvement with household staff, his duty was clear. He began compiling documentation. Photographs taken with long-range lenses showed Faisal and Isabella in the garden, their body language intimate. Audio recordings captured fragments of conversation that confirmed emotional and physical relationship. Time-stamped logs documented every secret meeting, every deviation from routine. But Ahmad was strategic. He didn't report to Sheikh Khalid immediately. Instead, he gave the information to Rashid, calculating that the ambitious elder brother would want to control how this information was weaponized. Faisal's disgrace could be leveraged, turned into an opportunity to consolidate power by demonstrating his brother's unfitness for family responsibility. Rashid received the evidence with cold satisfaction. His brother, who had always positioned himself as morally superior, who had questioned the family's values and methods, was revealed as guilty of the most shameful betrayal imaginable. Not just having an affair with staff, which would be embarrassing but manageable, but genuinely caring for her, which represented fundamental rejection of everything their family stood for. "How long has this been happening?" Rashid asked, reviewing the documented evidence. 5 months, Ahmed replied, "since approximately February." It was now July, 5 months of deception. 5 months of his brother spitting on family honor. 5 months that Rashid could now use to his advantage. But Rashid was patient. He didn't confront Faisal immediately. Instead, he began laying groundwork for controlled exposure that would maximize damage while minimizing scandal. He arranged for Isabella's contract to be terminated under pretext of reduced staffing needs. He secured alternative employment for her with a family in Abu Dhabi, far enough away to end the affair while avoiding the questions that immediate deportation might raise. The separation, he calculated, would be unbearable for his lovesick brother. Faisal would either accept it, proving he'd just been using the girl for amusement, or he'd do something foolish that would provide perfect justification for harsh consequences. Rashid was counting on foolish. Faisal learned about Isabella's termination through Rashid himself, who delivered the news with elaborate concern for propriety. The family has decided to restructure household staffing, Rashid explained, his tone professionally regretful. Isabella's contract will be terminated next week. We've arranged excellent placement for her with the Al Nahyan family in Abu Dhabi. Better salary, lighter responsibilities. She should be grateful for our assistance. Faisal's face remained carefully neutral, but his hands trembled. Why? Why not? Rashid replied, studying his brother's reaction. Staff come and go. Surely you're not suggesting we need to justify routine personnel decisions. The test was explicit. If Faisal protested too strongly, he'd reveal the affair. If he accepted quietly, he'd prove the relationship was disposable. Either way, Rashid won. Faisal chose the path that would doom them both. I need to speak with her. That would be inappropriate, Rashid said, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. Her employment status makes such interaction problematic, unless there's something you need to tell me, brother. The conversation ended with neither man acknowledging what both knew, but the trap was set. That night, Faisal broke protocol completely. He went to Isabella's quarters, something family members never did. She was packing her few belongings, tears streaming down her face as she tried to fold the modest wardrobe she'd accumulated during her months of service. Come with me, Faisal said from her doorway. Tonight, we'll leave Dubai, go somewhere they can't reach us. Isabella looked at him with devastation. Your family, my family, everyone who depends on us, we'd be destroying them to save ourselves. They're destroying us now, Faisal argued. Does that not matter? It matters, she whispered, but so do they. The conversation that followed was interrupted by compound security. Ahmed and 2 guards arrived, summoned by alarm that triggered when Faisal entered staff quarters. His transgression was now documented, witnessed, undeniable. Sheikh Rashid wants to see you, Ahmed told Faisal. Immediately. The meeting that followed in Sheikh Khalid's private office with the patriarch himself present was brutal. The surveillance evidence was presented methodically. Photographs, audio recordings, testimony from staff who'd noticed inconsistencies. The case against Faisal was comprehensive, humiliating, designed to strip away any defense. You have brought shame, Sheikh Khalid said, his voice like stone. To yourself, to this family, to our name, for what? For some Filipino servant girl who means nothing. She means everything, Faisal replied, the words sealing his fate. The consequences were delivered with clinical precision. Faisal would be sent to their family's Riyadh offices indefinitely. Isabella would be immediately deported, her visa cancelled, her name blacklisted from all GCC countries. Any attempt to contact her would result in her family in the Philippines facing economic retaliation through the Al-Mansour's extensive business networks. You will forget this woman, Sheikh Khalid commanded. You will marry appropriately within the year. You will prove your loyalty to this family, or you will find yourself with no family at all. Faisal said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. If you're still with us and wondering whether love can survive when power decides it shouldn't exist, stay tuned. Because what happened next reveals that sometimes the choice isn't between love and family, but between submission and final rebellion. Hit that subscribe button, because the next part of this story involves a choice that couldn't be undone and consequences that destroyed everyone involved. Faisal had 48 hours before his flight to Riyadh. Isabella had 36 hours before deportation. Both understood that separation under these terms meant permanent ending, not temporary obstacle. The Al-Mansour's resources could track them anywhere, could make any future contact catastrophic for everyone they loved. They met one final time, in the garden under the jasmine tree where they'd shared so many conversations. It was 2:00 a.m., the compound quiet except for distant fountain sounds and the soft rustling of leaves in warm night air. I can't live knowing I destroyed your life, Isabella said, her face wet with tears. You didn't destroy anything, Faisal replied, holding her close. You saved me from destroying myself by living the half-life they designed for me. They talked through the night, exploring every possible future. None of them worked. Running away meant condemning their families to retaliation. Staying meant being forced into separate lives, monitored and controlled until their love became a bitter memory. As dawn approached, they made the decision that would end both their lives. "If we can't be together in this world," Faisal said quietly, "then maybe the next world will be kinder." Isabella understood what he was suggesting. In their months together, they discussed faith and its contradictions. Both had been raised in traditions that condemned suicide while also preaching merciful God's ultimate judgment. Both had reached point where this life's cruelty felt less bearable than facing whatever divine judgment awaited. "Are you certain?" she asked. "I'm certain that I can't live without you," he replied. "And I'm certain that what we feel is worth more than what they tell us we're allowed to feel." The decision made, they chose their method with terrible precision. The jasmine tree that had witnessed their love would witness their deaths. Faisal had access to his father's medications, powerful sedatives that in sufficient doses would stop hearts within hours. They would fall asleep together, wrapped in each other's arms, and simply not wake up. "I'm not afraid," Isabella whispered as Faisal prepared the mixture. "Being with you was worth everything, even this." They took the pills together, then lay down beneath the tree, fingers intertwined. They talked as the drugs took effect, their voices growing softer, their breathing more labored. They spoke of the life they'd imagined together, the children they'd never have, the ordinary happiness that had been denied them by circumstances beyond their control. "I love you," Faisal said, his consciousness fading. "I love you," Isabella replied, "in this life and whatever comes after." Those were the last words either spoke. The discovery reprise. When the groundskeeper found them at dawn, their bodies were still warm. Their hands were still intertwined. On the ground beside them was a letter written in Faisal's careful handwriting explaining everything. The love they'd found, the impossibility of maintaining it, the choice they'd made to die together rather than live apart. The letter was addressed to Sheikh Khalid, but it was also a document meant for posterity. Faisal had detailed his family's cruelty, the systemic oppression of people like Isabella, the spiritual bankruptcy of power so absolute it crushed human connection. It was part suicide note, part manifesto, part accusation that would haunt the Al-Mansours forever. Dubai police arrived within minutes. The investigation was thorough but ultimately simple. Toxicology confirmed massive overdoses of sedatives. The letter provided clear evidence of suicide pact. There was no mystery about what happened, only about how to manage the scandal. The cover-up. The Al-Mansour family's crisis management machinery activated immediately. Lawyers, PR specialists, and government contacts worked through the morning to control the narrative. The official story became tragic accident. Two young people, the beloved younger son and a trusted employee, had been talking in the garden when they accidentally ingested toxic fruit from a decorative plant. Unfortunate, unforeseeable, no one to blame. Faisal's letter was seized as evidence and never publicly released. Staff who might have known about the relationship were paid generously to sign NDAs and accept immediate transfers to other positions. Security footage was purged. The jasmine tree was removed entirely, as though erasing it could erase what happened beneath its branches. Isabella's family in the Philippines received her body and $50,000 in what was termed humanitarian assistance. They were told their daughter had died in an unfortunate accident while employed by one of Dubai's most respected families. Her grandmother accepted the money but never spoke about Isabella again, as though silence could protect her memory from whatever truth was being hidden. Faisal was buried in the family cemetery with full honors. His obituary emphasized his cultural contributions and charitable work. His rebellion was erased, his final act of defiance buried along with his body. But secrets that big have a way of leaking. Within months, whispers spread through Dubai's Filipino community. Household staff who'd known Isabella shared stories. Security personnel who'd seen the letter before it was confiscated described its contents in quiet conversations. The truth, fragmented but persistent, began circulating through social networks and overseas worker advocacy groups. International media picked up fragments of the story, though the Al-Mansour's legal teams worked aggressively to suppress detailed reporting. What emerged in public discourse was carefully sanitized version. Possible forbidden romance between employer-family member and household staff, tragic dual death, questions about working conditions for domestic employees in Gulf states. The Al-Mansour empire survived, diminished but intact. Sheikh Khalid died 2 years later, his final years haunted by the son he'd driven to suicide. Rashid inherited control, became the patriarch he'd always been groomed to be. But the family never fully recovered the reputation that had been fractured when 2 bodies were found in their garden. Today, the Al-Mansour compound still stands in Emirates Hills, still houses one of Dubai's most powerful families. But the garden has never been restored. Where the jasmine tree once grew, there's now only empty space, as though the earth itself rejects anything planted in soil stained by such tragedy. In the Philippines, Isabella's family used the $50,000 to build a small school in her grandmother's village. It's named Santa Isabella Academy, and it provides free education to children whose families can't afford tuition. Her grandmother died never knowing the full truth of what happened, but believing her granddaughter had somehow made a difference before she was taken too young. In Dubai's Filipino community, Isabella and Faisal's story became legend. Parents warn daughters about getting too close to employer families. But young women also whisper about the forbidden love that was real enough to die for, about the woman who was seen and valued by someone who could have chosen anyone but chose her. The questions their deaths raised remain unanswered. When does love stop being personal choice and become political act? When does family loyalty become oppression? Where is the line between tradition and tyranny? And perhaps most importantly, what does it say about our world when 2 people would rather die together than live apart in the cages their circumstances created? If you've stayed with us through this entire tragedy, thank you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe these stories matter, if you think the lives of domestic workers deserve to be remembered as fully human, if you believe that love shouldn't be a crime punishable by death. Share this video if you think the systems that made their love impossible need to be challenged and changed. Leave a comment telling us what you think. Were Faisal and Isabella brave or foolish? Were they victims or rebels? And what does their story teach us about the real cost of inequality and power? Their love was impossible. Their deaths were preventable. Their story is unforgettable. Rest in peace, Isabella Santos and Faisal Al-Mansour. May you have found in death the freedom you were denied in life.